the top of the hype cycle is that classic moment where expectation is so radically out of step with what these technologies can actually deliver. Ultimately, it becomes damaging because clearly it's impossible to meet those expectations.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Squeezing the Juice, an extended reality podcast from Juice Immersive. This week, I've got the pleasure of welcoming onto the show Alex Book. Alex is co-founder and chief strategy officer at Arcade XR. Alex, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Yeah, really well, thanks, Owen. Other than a cricket ball in the face a few weeks ago, which means I'm not quite as pretty as I usually am, I'm doing all right.
You've been in the wars, I believe, yeah. So long as you're feeling a bit better now, we'll try and, I don't know, put an AR filter on you or something. What would you like it to be?
Oh, the possibilities are endless. Anything would be an improvement, though.
Bless you. How's your luck? Yeah, cricket ball. Wow. Okay, so I don't normally kick off with this question, Alex, but I will do just because I think off camera we had an interesting conversation about this. What would you define as XR, as extended reality, in terms of the technology itself?
Wow, start with the big stuff. So I think what you're referring to is whenever I find myself talking about XR, my first instinct is often to try not to put it on some kind of pedestal, to make a bigger deal out of it than frankly it deserves. It's emergent technology. It's doing some brilliant and fabulously exciting new things that we are learning more about every day. But it's also been doing that for quite a long time now. So I think it's beneficial, certainly to those of us who work in this space and ultimately to the people that we're creating it for, not to overemphasize its kind of otherness. So when we talk about XR, extended reality, which I think has become, finally we've got this little phrase that probably does have some use in wrapping up a bundle of technologies, a bundle of different hardware and software approaches that are evolving how we engage with digital content, because we've had a few candidates for that phrase that we use over the years, from immersive tech and spatial computing and all these other ones that are floating around. XR is a handy little label that we can put on some of these emerging technologies that are evolving digital experience from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, is broadly how I would define it. And as I say, the key for me is not to sort of overemphasize or try and make it feel like magic and sci-fi and something that's coming at us over the horizon that's going to change everything we possibly know about experience, but just framing it in those terms. It's an evolution of the way that we the way that we engage with digital experience, and that is quite profound. Certainly it's changing things quite radically across a whole variety of sectors, but it is also an incremental thing. It's been happening for quite a long time, probably measurable in decades rather even than years. And of course, once we're seeing the convergence and the maturity of these technologies coming together, which has probably been slower than a lot of us working in the sector, A, would have hoped for, and B, we're expecting. But as we're watching that happen, it is becoming a big change, but it's also most helpfully becoming normal. We're starting to see more and more of it, which is why that kind of ring fencing approach that we sometimes see around emergent tech is sometimes not the best thing for it. The way that we get it out there, the way that we allow it to fulfill its potential, is by making it feel normal. It's just digital. It's just experience, because ultimately it's not about the tech. It's about the impact. It's about what this stuff is able to do for us as consumers, more than it is about getting carried away about all the cool and innovative and completely new things that we can do with it as creators and devs.
It's really interesting. I think that approach of trying to discard the otherness of XR. So when you're talking to partners or prospects or people who perhaps say the sorts of things that we often hear as well at Juice, things like we don't know what we don't know. You guys are the wizards. You're the experts in this. How do you sort of try and reposition and reframe that conversation given that?
It's a balancing act. Despite what I've just said, of course, we talk about these technologies as impactful new ways, the new tools in the toolbox that are opening up new possibilities, new opportunities that didn't exist before. So I'd be lying if I said that we completely downplay everything that these can do and it just becomes more digital. That's not true either. But we are also careful not to make it feel like some kind of magic wand, because, as I say, in our experience, that's actually proven to be less helpful. Expectations suddenly go, absolutely through the roof. That hype cycle that all these technologies typically have, and that augmented reality, for example, probably had around 2021 into 2022. The top of the hype cycle is that classic moment where expectation is so radically out of step with what these technologies can actually deliver. Ultimately, it becomes damaging because clearly it's impossible to meet those expectations. And that doesn't mean that just because you're not meeting expectations that the technologies themselves are not fit for purpose and ought to be discarded. Quite the opposite, usually. It means that they've got real value, real practical impact and potential. It's just that it's in a different way to how some of those expectations have been set, often by people talking a little bit over enthusiastically about what these magic new things can achieve. So I think the risk of sounding a bit kind of, calm, dare I say it, maybe even boring when it comes to describing this tech, we find that has much greater impact, is much more effective when we're talking to those partners than going in all guns blazing and saying, let me dazzle you with the newest, most amazing, innovative new thing, because it's incredible. That's great. That's in some cases sales, I suppose. But ultimately, I think it's not that helpful because it doesn't reflect the reality of what this tech is and what it does. There is novelty to it. Of course there is. And I think for all of us who come into this space, we can probably all remember when we first saw something in AR or put on a VR headset, playing with these technologies. There, of course, is these moments of novelty where we see something for the first time and it blows our minds. We go, that's phenomenal. I've never seen anything like it before. I can't wait to see where it's going to take us. I'm so excited by this. You've got to come look. You've got to check this thing out. We've all had those moments. But that typically happens once per bit of technology. And the second time we see it, it's kind of like, oh yeah, there's that thing that I've seen before. And by the third and the fourth time, it's just a thing. It's just that. So novelty by definition is fleeting. So it helps us, I think, when we are talking to those partners, those clients, to show how these things have real value, have real impact. And that's not so much to do with novelty and much more to do with all those much more measurable, strategic, and by comparison, they sound quite dry, quite boring, but those are the things that really matter. And those are the things that get this stuff bought and really picked up. We need the innovators, of course we do. We need the people who are doing brilliant, bonkers, creative, artistic things with the tech. But its route to normalization and mass adoption, and we're not at that point yet, is by showing how effective these things can be.
That's great. Yeah, I think clients are obviously on a spectrum really, but I always feel like the optimum conversations with a prospect or a partner is one in which they're interested in the tech and how it can do what it can do, but there's a limit to that level of interest. They're far more switched on by the potential it has for them and their organization and what it might mean for the experience of their customers and consumers. And I guess in your world and what Arcade XR do, which we'll move on to now, that's a common thing.
Yeah, it's absolutely that. As I say, these technologies have their moments in the sun, if you like, the top of the hype cycle, where typically budgets are much, much easier to unlock, because for certain sectors, being seen to be at the cutting edge is really, really important. And so those strategic questions, the proof of efficacy and impact, get sort of knocked down a little bit below, are we doing the latest thing? Are we doing something that no one's ever done before? Those are the metrics that then sort of bubble to the top when you're in that period. And that's okay, but that doesn't last. And for the most part, and certainly where we are at the moment, the way that this gets picked up and adopted is through proof of efficacy, through data, through measurable impact, because the people who are buying it, as you say, they are switched on. There's not many who are still just blindly chucking cash at these technologies because I feel like I ought to. That moment happened, but we're well through that now. There are other technologies where we're seeing a lot of that at the moment instead, whether that's virtual worlds, whether that's obviously in the wide and varied space of AI. But for sort of core XR, if you like, the kind of things I've been talking about, it's definitely about that really, really positive path to normalization. And that's not about just being crazy and mad and expecting the world.
Yeah, we're finding kind of XR adoption is now appearing pretty routinely in most clients' digitalization or transformation strategies, and not years down the line like now. Okay, brilliant. Alex, tell me a bit about Arcade XR for those who are watching and listening who don't know kind of what your wheelhouse is, what you guys do.
Yeah, no worries. So we started in about 2018, myself and two co-founders, brilliant co-founders, may I say, in case they're watching this, John Meggitt and Simon Hobbs. Their background was really the thing that got me in. I'd known them socially for a long time, but they met when they were studying architecture at Nottingham back in the dark ages, I think. But rather than go into architecture, they set up a digital agency. In fact, they always tell the story that it was so long ago that it wasn't even called digital. It was called new media at the time. But they did that in the sort of early, mid-2000s, built that very successfully. I was always looking over in their direction, very sort of envious and impressed by their entrepreneurship. They built that and sold it into one of the big agency networks, IPG. And then when they came out of that in about 2015, 2016, they were sort of casting around and trying to work out where they wanted to go next. And as I say, I knew them. We were talking about some of these things. And where they landed in sort of 2016 into 2017 was trying to bring back not architecture as a discipline, but architecture as a appreciation of space and place, of the real world. Because all the digital stuff they've been doing, almost by definition, up to that point, was on screens. It was web. It was setting up internal communications websites. It was lots of sort of early stage app development. It was things like that, and they wanted to bring the real world back into that. And it almost just coincidentally so happened that was at the same time as the likes of Apple and Tim Cook were really starting to get very, very loud about augmented reality in particular. And when you think about physical space plus digital experience, you've almost accidentally defined augmented reality. That's what it is. And so I think that was the light bulb moment for them. And when we was talking about it, Arcade XR came out of that thought of how can we bring physical space, digital content together at a time when it felt like there was this real bubbling up of the technologies that would enable precisely that three-dimensional digital experience in the real world, wherever you happen to be. So that led to a sort of founding mission of connecting people to place through play. And that's a mission that we still follow today. We started a lot of work with, or certainly by looking at the arts and culture heritage space, and believed then and still believe now that it's one of the areas that these technologies can have the greatest impact. It's one of the areas that's perhaps most in need of that ability to challenge perceptions and reframe relationships and connections between audiences and the thing. So in their case, it's about establishing or reframing what museums are, what galleries are, what heritage sites are, what arts experiences are, particularly the locations themselves. And we've been fortunate enough to do some I think I'm allowed to say, some great work in that space over the years. But it's also true that they're one of the sectors that struggle for funding the most. Perhaps as governments evolve and perhaps even change, who knows, that might change, and we certainly hope it does. But even then, compared to other more commercially driven sectors, they're always going to struggle a little bit. So over our lifetime, we've opened that out a bit. We've worked across sports and entertainment. We've done a lot of brand and marketing work, which it typically is that space where some of the metrics are, yes, about efficacy and impact, but of course also about how can we drive engagement through, social media reach and impressions, and you do that through innovation and novelty. So that's why we see a lot of that sort of the top of the hype cycle work with XR in that sort of very commercial space, and we've really enjoyed a lot of the work that we've done there. More recently, we've taken a look back at the best work we've done and tried to find the thread that seems to run through it. And it turns out that a lot of the work that we've really done that we would use as examples of us at our best are focused one way or another around learning. So whether that's pure classroom-based and education using digital technologies in those sorts of environments, or whether it's on location, at some of those heritage or cultural institutions, bringing people in, often young people, in to give them a learning experience, but a learning experience that doesn't feel like traditional learning at all. In fact, has many, many more similarities with the world of play, and particularly with whether that's computer games, but other forms of game and play. And using those techniques and play mechanics, we're able to change what a learning experience can be. And there's reams and reams of research, not necessarily even just related to digital, but to play in general as such an important driver of effective learning principles. So driving to far greater levels of information retention, far greater levels of desire to continue to engage with learning, and far greater levels of a real push to come back and to continue and to learn more. And that's really, really exciting, because I think particularly for those sorts of cultural partners, but for anyone involved in that learning space, harnessing the impact of play, which is one of the things that these emergent technologies do so well, is increasingly becoming a massive driver that's defining the future of education. And that's a really exciting space to be in. And it's certainly one that when we reflected on, as I say, on us at our best, we've been able to kind of draw a thread through those experiences at the National Gallery and with the British Museum and Glastonbury Abbey and amazing places like that, and some incredible partners as well along the way, and start to say that feels like the thing that we really want to pursue. And so increasingly that's where we're driving towards as a company.
Such an exciting area that you work in, specifically, I think, around that kind of heritage and cultural space. I think you've talked previously about some of the barriers around cultural engagement that are there still that need to be broken down. How does XR help in that regard from your perspective?
I think it's a couple of ways. One is focusing on specifically the benefits of XR, by which, again, to me, the simplest definition of that is three-dimensional digital experience. There is a proximity and all of the benefits of feeling close to something, that by placing that into a user space or by inviting them into that digital space, you create a connection. And emotionally, that leads to far different outcomes than more traditional learning experiences. So when we are physically close to things, we start to feel a bit more empathy for them. When we can bring them to life in using animation and various creative techniques to offer experiences where you don't just look or read or do these very traditional passive forms of engagement, but start to converse or interact or play, most obviously, explore, discover, adventure, journey, all these very, very active. You can tell it just by the language. These become very active verbs that you start to use to describe these experiences. And already, therefore, you've got an audience who are in a radically different mode than they would be in a more traditional learning setup. So I think that's what XR is great at. More broadly, when we think about the use of digital, because as you can probably tell, for us, of course, XR is our specialism. It's in our name. But it really is a set of tools that sit alongside all of the more traditional digital and non-digital capabilities that we feel like you need to be able to be effective in this space. So it's an ingredient rather than the whole. And when we use digital in these spaces, one of the huge benefits, particularly when we're working with young people, and of course when we think about learning and education, the most obvious place to start is obviously young people. The simple act of allowing them access to technology as a really positive part of a learning experience instantly reframes what that experience is going to be. Now, the emphasis, the onus is still very, very much on making sure that that digital experience is brilliant and fun and effective and tied to curriculum and all of the things it needs to be. But just the act of putting the kinds of media that they're so used to engaging with through all the rest of their lives, I say they, I mean us, this is true of all of us, it challenges instantly any pre-existing perceptions of what this learning thing's about to be. And that's true when they turn up to a museum visit, that's true in a classroom, that's true when they get dragged to one of these places by parents, which for many of us, of course, we can all recall that feeling of the, oh my God, I've got to go to the museum, and when can we go and get a chocolate bar? I mean, it's a stereotype, but it's still so true. I'm a parent, and it's absolutely the case. So doing something that just says immediately, often with a very tangible object that instantly reframes what you're about to do, is massively impactful. And I think that's really exciting. So for us, it's the combination of the two. XR is a really, really powerful ingredient and often has a place in these experiences, much, much, much more often than not for us, but not always. There are still plenty of opportunities to look at designing experiences that have these as ingredients. There's still room for paper within some of these learning experiences as part of a whole. But when we can introduce these technologies and we use them in the right way for the things that they are best at, then this is true across a whole variety of different sectors, but for learning experiences, yeah, it has a radical impact.
Fantastic. Yeah, I completely share that childhood memory of feeling like I was being dragged to the museum to learn when it's not a school day. What are we doing here? And but the technology wasn't there then to enrich that experience and to lift it off the page or out the frame. I think it's interesting. It's something that Matt talked at length about with us on the podcast a few weeks back, the impact on learning of play, just play as a concept, forgetting the technology for a moment. So I think when you can do what you guys do so well, which is blend that physical space and respect that physical heritage location with digital technology that kids love and have come to expect, you're absolutely in the sweet spot there. Just a question on that. I was looking at one of your case studies, which I'd love you to tell us a bit more about. Actually, it was the Time Odyssey piece with the British Museum. I think it was in that case study. You talked about having to always be careful about limiting the screen time and limiting the amount of engagement with devices. Is that something that is kind of always a part of your approach and your work? Yeah.
I'd be surprised if anyone working in our broader space of XR generally, and frankly digital, doesn't encounter that at some point or other. But obviously when we're talking about learning, and particularly when we're talking about young people, then that's always a really interesting and really important topic of discussion. There are some amazing and I think very valuable campaigns to limit or even eradicate smartphone use amongst children. I think some of the points that are raised are really, really valuable. We've all seen what some of these devices are capable of, and part of our problem, I suppose, is that they are so universal. We can do so many different things with them all in the one place. So that means when we look at these things, and particularly when we see children looking at these things, then it's not always obvious that the experience that they're having is enriching, is wholesome. And it's certainly true that, like any medium, there's plenty of content within the world of XR that isn't those things. So we have to, I think, as an industry, and we're quite careful of doing this at Arcade. We can't shy away from that. We can't just sort of wave it off and say, yeah, but the kids love it, so it's all fine. I think we have to say, really, eyes open. It's about careful, sensitive, inclusive design that doesn't hero the device itself, that uses it carefully, that uses it sometimes sparingly. And that's true of the hardware, and it's also true of the experience as well. So I think there's a sort of overarching piece about, should we be putting devices into people's hands, children's hands, in these environments or in the home or when they're out and about, even if the intent is positive, even if the intent is to give them an enriching learning experience, don't they already get enough screen time? It's hard to argue that kids ought to have more screen time. I don't think anybody's suggesting that. But I think the main counter argument is, and it feels a bit, I don't know, it feels a bit too glib to say it, but I think there is no better way, and that the genie is out of the bottle. It's true for all of us, again, not just kids, that the genie is out of the bottle. These devices are here to stay. And again, like any medium, they themselves are not good or bad. It's how we use them, it's what we use them for that really matters. There's some amazingly positive things that that this technology opens up for us as a society, and it also brings with it some dangers. So I think the top level, when we're working with these organizations, is to say, you know what, if you feel strongly that you want to be a space, that you want to be an organization that is standing against the tide of digital and of hardware in particular, that's okay. We're not going to argue against that. All we can do is show what can be achieved if you come at it from a slightly different perspective. And if you say that kids, families, parents, if they come to your space, let's take cultural institutions as an example, when they come to you, when they walk through the doors, very, very often, if you just stand and observe, there'll be people in those groups of all ages who already have them out and are using them not to engage with the space they're in. They'll be using them to distract, frankly, from what they're there to do. So rather than trying to get them to put them away, instead, why don't we harness some of the things that they're really, really good at? And if they're out anyway, why don't we turn them from a distraction to an enhancement? Why don't we let them become the thing that fosters connection, not to the device, but to the environment, to the people they're with, to the spaces they're in the case of the National Gallery or the British Museum, the collections that are around them, these amazing objects. That's our goal. And I think when we start to frame them like that, there are increasingly few voices that are completely resistant. That's certainly what we're finding. But that last point is probably for us one of the key things and you'll see that certainly with Time Odyssey, which I can talk more about in a minute, but also all of our other experiences for cultural institutions and beyond, where we see those kind of, I always think about it there's three fundamental modes when we're offering something with mobile devices. There's phone up, which is our kind of XR experience. There's something going on in 3 dimensions and it's over there and I've got to look at it like this, and that's really impactful. But for very practical reasons, apart from anything else, you can't hold a phone up for that long. After about sort of 60 seconds, 90 seconds at the most, your arm starts to ache a little bit. So there's just no point designing for it to be longer than that. And in almost every case, it doesn't need to be. You can achieve something really impactful as part of a narrative adventure or imparting some knowledge or having a little mini game that can take much shorter than that. Then there's sort of phone down, which is more traditional sort of 2D content. So whether that's narrative exposition, whether that's characters talking to us, again, there's plenty of opportunity for gameplay with phone down. But maybe the most important mode is phone away, where you're then into a point where the phone or the tablet or whatever it is isn't enhancing your experience, isn't offering anything, because the whole point of that point in your experience is the space you're in, the people you're with. You're being promoted or encouraged, motivated to talk to them, to look around, to explore. Because going back to that mission of connecting people to place through play, there's no mention of technology in there. There's no mention of device. It is about the people. It is about the place, and play is the form, is the way that we create that connection. And as I say, I think when you start to see that in action, whether that's with Time Odyssey at the British Museum, whether that's with the Keeper of Paintings at the National Gallery, I think increasing what we're seeing is that people are okay with it. Even those that may have been sort of instinctively a bit resistant to start with, whether that's concerns about screen time, whether that's concerns about seeing people and kids running around with phones in their, these traditional spaces of cultural appreciation, they see that actually these things can have a really positive effect. They can drive engagement in ways that would be very, very hard to do any other way. And so increasingly, I think those barriers are being not just glibly pushed to the side, but really addressed head on. And I think that's the right way to do it.
Great. Yeah, I love your mission, connecting people to place through play. And this isn't just about making museums and places more fun for kids, is it? Because like you say, it's not just kids who use these things. We're guilty of using them probably more hours a day than a lot of our kids are. So can you talk a little bit about that, about how it helps bind us as adults and parents and older generations to place and to experience and to each other as well? And feel free to do so through the lens of any of your amazing case studies.
Yeah, thank you. I've always felt quite strongly about it, and yet we have found ourselves developing lots of experiences for young people, and that's cool. That's really fun. And it's taken us into schools and standing at the front of classes, and I've never had more respect for primary, secondary school teachers than when I'm stood in front of a class of 30-something kids. And that's where I get the benefit, A, of only being there for an hour or two, and B, talking about tech and games and fun. And it's still absolutely exhausting. But we get to be in those spaces. We do get to work with lots of young people and often work with them to design these experiences too, which has been another hallmark of a lot of the work that we've done. And that's great. But it is also true that play for us is a universal. It's a human truth, not a child truth. Famously, we sort of seem to lose some of that ambition or desire for play as we get older, or at least that's the narrative. I think that has changed over time. I can only speak for myself and anecdotally looking around, but I know there are also plenty of research reports about the role that play plays throughout life. And you only need to look at a sort of family multi-generational board game to know that play has such an important place in driving that social connection, whether that's family, whether that's friends. So taking an example like the Keeper of Paintings at the National Gallery, which was explicitly designed for 7 to 11-year-olds, so Key Stage 2, but thinking about the family unit and family visitors. So yes, it's an experience that's designed for a child actually to be able to lead, which is a really important and again a really interesting and very profound way of shifting that person's perspective about what this museum visit is. Suddenly they're not being dragged along. They're the ones doing the dragging. They're the ones who are saying, come on, keep up. We're going this way. We're doing that. Here's this challenge. And that's been really, really interesting, obviously, in terms of how young people themselves have engaged with somewhere like the gallery, which they would admit, I think, is in many ways quite a challenging environment for lots of people. And again, not just families, but it's a societal thing. A place like that isn't or doesn't feel like it's for everyone. But not only is it for everyone, it's in a way owned by everyone. It is the National Gallery, it's the national collection. It is ours. It's all of ours. So it's a really important mission for them to make that environment feel as open and welcoming as possible. And so having an experience that can sit alongside a more traditional gallery visit is a really, really important part of that, because it immediately challenges some of those perceptions for children, but maybe more importantly, for the families, for the parents, for older generations. And one of the best things about it that we've seen is that it isn't just the kids who enjoy playing it. Back to that point about the impact of play is, whether that's older siblings who can be, sort of teens or even older. The 7 to 11-year-old might be sort of playing their way through, and the teenager who's turned up as well to be there starts off a bit sort of disinterested, and then they sort of start glancing over the younger sibling's shoulder, and then they start taking their own phone out and saying, where's this at? Where did you download it? And then they start playing it as well, and then they get really into it. And it's true for them, and it's true for parents. And we just hear again and again and again how transformative. And actually, that's not even our word. We keep hearing that word told to us about how it changes the way that not just kids, but families, older kids, adults can engage, through play with a space like the gallery.
Good stuff. And yeah, if it's okay, just to give us a bit of insight into the Time Odyssey project with the British Museum and Art Explorer. Is that okay, Alex?
Yeah, and in many ways, that's the one that, what I was saying before about us taking a look at the thread that runs through our work and focusing on the space of learning. This is a really, really good example of it because it is explicitly for schools. So it's location-based, but it's for school group visitors. Developed with the British Museum, funded by the arts charity Art Explorer, and it was designed to work at the British Museum, but also at any one of their partner museums, of which there were dozens, I think, spread across the country. And that's a really interesting challenge because unlike the Keeper of Paintings, which was designed to work at the National Gallery specifically and with the collection at that gallery, this was designed and had to be able to work flexibly across all these different museums, completely different collections, some of them with very different emphasis even. So, obviously the British Museum has got quite a lot of everything, but some of the partner museums are typically smaller because every museum is smaller than the British Museum, but also sometimes have particular themes. And so it was about designing an experience that would offer that challenge of perception of a museum visit to schools, so that when kids turn up, as exciting as school trips to museums can be, again, my own memories and now seeing it through my children's eyes, it's still a museum. It's still a bit where we go around and we get told what to look at and we get told what to learn, and that can be cool and that can be really fun and really interesting. But if we can use some of the techniques that we've just been talking about, even for big, rowdy, chaotic school groups, to let them play, let them use technology, to let them play a game through the British Museum and these other partner museums, then we're doing something a bit different. And so its goal was very much that. It was to focus on taking school groups through, probably to last an average school visit, which would be something in the region of a couple of hours, maybe a bit longer, with a break for lunch in the middle as well. And so we designed a narrative adventure in which you get to meet 4 characters from different places and different parts of history, focusing on this idea that these museums are incredible places, that they're really powerful, they're magical because of all of these incredible objects that have been collected there, and that they've been there for such a long time, and they have this kind of almost weight through time and through history, and that can do some funny things, in this case to the timeline, and can almost pull these characters from different times and places into the museum. And the kids are tasked, working in small teams of just 2 or 3 with, in this case it was Samsung tablets, to choose one of these 4 characters, all quite young, that we had designed to sort of work across the curriculum. So a character from Roman Britain, character from ancient Egypt, ancient China, and a Viking character as well. Deliberately designed to be their sort of age, so it felt like a very peer-to-peer relationship. And the kids are tasked with going through the collections at the museum and finding objects and finding textures that they could use to create the equipment that these characters need in order to get back home. So a really creative task, using things like really nice concept of a digital brass rubbing. So where you get to go up to an object, or you get to stand in a gallery and you're tasked to find something that feels powerful, or that feels protective, or is made of a natural material. So things are designed to get them thinking and exploring the space. As I say, it's not just device up or device down, it's device away, because I'm having to look around and find things. And then when I found them, I can then capture, in this case, it's an image, but I can bring that to life by sort of rubbing on the screen. I can effectively works as like a brass rubbing. So that also means that these objects, almost all sitting behind glass cases, or certainly off limits, and very, your senses, I'm not supposed to touch these things. Suddenly you can engage with them through technology in a much more tactile, visceral way, that immediately makes them feel more familiar, more you feel closer to them. And because you've created these objects that you then get to furnish your character with, and then eventually, if you've been successful, send them home through the super mega portal at the end, which is great. Then you feel like you've played this game, you've accomplished something, and along the way, you've probably picked up quite a few things about the collection, reading, interpretation, looking at the objects, thinking about where they've come from and how they were made and who made them and where they've been, and all these things that are such important parts of the narrative of the British Museum and other museums, becomes a really, really powerful way, from what we can see so far, of giving the kids an experience that they might not have expected, but they might remember for a very long time.
Fantastic. So from your partner's perspective on projects like that, so the British Museum in that instance, is there tangible commercialization opportunities for these clients?
Yes, really good question. I think from what we've seen so far, and again, thinking of the arts, culture, heritage sector specifically, which is obviously it's a part of the learning landscape, but only one part of it. But these are organisations that of course they have to fund themselves, and finance, commercial considerations are so important, particularly through quite long periods of time where access to funds has been so challenging for them. But at their heart, they still exist to drive engagement with culture. And again, that's for almost all these places across society, not just about young people, not just about schools, not just about learning. That said, as much as therefore we've created experiences that are typically offered for free, so Keeper of Paintings at the National Gallery is free to families. The Time Odyssey is free to schools. In fact, through the Time Odyssey programme with Art Explorer, they're even funding the transport to the museums for the schools. So in fact, they're paying the school to come and enjoy it because of that fundamental belief that these experiences ought to be free. We're trying to remove barriers to engagement, not create new ones. That said, when we start to think of them more as learning offers, of ways that we can sort of wrap these up into more of a kind of, call it a platform, and that's the kind of work that we're exploring at the moment, then clearly that needs to be funded one way or another. We've been fortunate through those different projects that they've all had different funding sources, whether that's Art Explorer with Time Odyssey, whether that's ultimately AHRC with the Keeper of Paintings, or private funding, or through universities or National Lottery. Those are all very individual approaches. We believe there is an opportunity there to sit alongside some of the other sort of classroom and extended learning platforms that exist, where schools or the education system or private or charity funders would look to support them, where yes, there is a commercial approach, and that it can be an effective success in and of itself in the wider learning landscape. And the only other thing to say about that is that it can have sort of secondary impact on commercialization, even for those environments where it's being offered for free. So whether that's merchandise in a shop, like So the keeper paintings in the National Gallery shop, you can pick up stationery and magnets and things like that, badges, notebooks. So there's a bit of a driver for revenue generation there. We created a trail for Forestry England using Zog, so the Julia Donaldson IP. And the app itself was free to download, but families were invited to buy a little physical pack for, I think it was about £3 or £4, which complemented that experience. So the two things worked really nicely together. And again, that's obviously a really effective fundraising opportunity. So commercialization can come in quite a few forms. And we definitely think that there's an avenue for that. And as I say, that's something we're exploring at the moment.
Great stuff. Let's throw up a couple of other questions I want to squeeze in before we wrap up. But just while we're on the commercial world a little bit, you mentioned earlier in the show that you obviously do other projects away from the heritage and museum space. At the risk of it being a sensitive topic, you've done some stuff in sport, particularly in cricket, I believe. So tell us a little bit about some of that, if that's okay, Alex.
Yeah, it's I mean, personally, as it happens, big sports fan. Cricket is a bit of a touchy subject right now, but I am a big cricket fan as well. And so the opportunity to work in sport is a fascinating space. It's something that we are continuing to look at, not least because I think when we talk about learning, we're not being so sort of narrow in terms of the definition of that, to think that has to be school curriculum based. We certainly can be, and we think a big part of what we're exploring is likely to fit into that category. But learning can come in so many different forms. It's, as we've already said, not just for young people, in the same way that play isn't. We're learning all the time, so offering ways to educate and to engage with content and information across a whole variety of different sectors is really, really interesting. And that's really true of sport. So whether that's training, whether that's based on, how do I get more people into this sport by helping them get better at it, that's learning. Whether that's actually closer to the crossover between sports and the cultural sector, because these sports organisations, many of the big ones, many of the small ones, have museums, have got amazing archives of all of their history and heritage, going back in some cases hundreds of years. So learning can be how to engage fans and audiences with that content, again in really very similar ways that we've already talked about, taking people through club museums or stadium tours and things like that. Still very much fits that model and that principle of connecting people to place through play. Really nails it. It just happens to be in a sports environment rather than a specific learning or a cultural heritage one. So lots and lots of reasons, therefore, that it is still a really, really cool space. And we get to work with sports, which, as I say, for me personally and for many of us in the company is really exciting and really cool. The cricket work you were talking about was trying to add that sort of flavour of digital and innovation to the 100, which has been around for a few years now, but certainly the first couple of seasons were introducing a new form of the game, which was deliberately aimed at younger and family audiences, that was trying to challenge perceptions of what a sport like cricket is all about. And it still suffers from lots of perceptions about it being quite old, quite traditional, quite dusty, sounding a bit like some of the museums we were just talking about. So the crossover still is there as well. And using technology as a way of really signalling loud and clear that this isn't what you think it is. That if you have those perceptions, come and have a closer look, because it might turn out that you're wrong. And that's certainly what we've seen, where people see this thing that they weren't necessarily expecting compared to their perceptions of the sport. They have an experience where we were able to offer some of the stars of the 100 cricket superstars that we'd motion captured and then placed as avatars that people could place wherever they were. But then also in the stadiums, sort of supersized, looming over the stands. And that was for a few different reasons that I've just mentioned. One was about sort of signalling that this is different and that I get to have this really interesting and unusual and exciting avatar encounter. And the other is because they were motion captured with a really high level of detail, you can see how these people, men and women, do what they do. You can see how they play their shots and bowl their balls, and you can learn. So we were really excited that it had that, sort of entertainment aspect, but also the learning and education one as well.
And you, of course, wish that the fast bowler you faced recently had been an avatar on your tabletop.
Yeah, a virtual injury would have been much less painful.
Yeah, and shorter lasting. Great. You touched briefly before on platform, and you made an exciting announcement at South by this year, Playable Places. Can you tell us a bit about that project and that proposition?
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, I think we're not alone in the sector, having felt that, in that period post the hype of 2021, 2022, partly because budgets generally across the creative industries are just being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed, partly because of whatever's coming next up that hype cycle. It's become challenging. It's been hard the last probably 12 to 18 months or so. So one of the things we've been trying to do, appreciating that it's becoming harder to unlock some of those budgets, but also harder for our partner organizations, for our clients to exist. They're trying to do more with less, as are we all. It's trying to look at what we've created to date and see if we can put it together in a more modular way that will obviously then speed up the process, that will make it easier, that will make it quicker, and will therefore, of course, make it cheaper for people, for clients, for organizations to be able to benefit from these technologies, which, as we've said, increasingly visitors, audiences are starting to expect. So Playable Places is looking at some of those most effective experiences that we've created: Keeper paintings, Zog, Time Odyssey, Glastonbury Stories at Glastonbury Abbey, lots of others besides, and trying to find again those sort of common threads and the common building blocks so that we can approach organizations, institutions, places, partners of all kinds of different types with a proposition that doesn't involve complete start from scratch bespoke experience. If anyone's watching who does have the budgets to allow for that kind of development, please come and talk to us. But by and large, if you do have that, you're in the minority at the moment. And so for the vast majority of people we speak to, people we work with, existing clients, future clients, the conversations are about how can we do more with less. And Playable Places is a way to do that. Taking the principles of experience building, of inclusive design, of using this full toolkit of digital offering, very much including but not limited to XR, and making a place playable. We're really excited about that. It's going to continue to be an important part of who we are and what we do. That link back to the physical world, the physical environment, is in our DNA. And then alongside that, we're also exploring the sort of the online. If that's on site, then what's the online experience? And we have developed quite a few experiences in that mode as well. And it's about exploring that further. So looking at schools and education opportunities that can take the same principles of learning through play and offering them alongside. So we've got a kind of dual offer, but Playable Places, working with physical environments, changing perceptions of visitor audiences and offering new ways to engage and play through them in spaces that you might not have expected to be able to do that kind of thing is what we're hoping to offer.
That's great. I love that. Really smart, but actually quite altruistic as well, I think, in terms of just helping people who, like you say, otherwise would have significant barriers to investing in these types of experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to paint us as saints or anything. We're a commercial business, but there definitely has been, over the last couple of years in particular, a need to help each other out. We can't all survive separated and independently, and that's true for businesses like ours, and it's true for many of the clients' organizations that we work with as well. So either we can kind of come together and try and find ways, effective ways to get through, or we might not make it at all. I don't want to paint a whole picture of doom and gloom. I mean, ultimately, our sense, I'm sure you agree, is that we're fortunate enough to work in an amazing space. We get to play with incredible tools, toys. We have fun. We create experiences. Most importantly, create experiences that have massive impact, particularly on young people. And it doesn't look like that opportunity is going to go away. So it's a growing space. It's just that times are cyclical, and right now they've been harder. So absolutely, how can we foster the mass uptake of these sorts of experiences across as wide a possible a range of places and environments? How can we make learning experiences for people of all ages, but particularly for young people, more inclusive, more accessible, more fun? We get to do that every day, and that's really exciting, and long may it last.
Good stuff. In what little time remains, just had two more questions. One just occurred to me when you were talking about the forestry, the Zog Trail that you guys did. Where are we at as an industry and as a sort of spectrum of technologies with outdoors AR or outdoors XR? Because obviously it throws up all sorts of challenges, working in natural light, in outdoor light. We're fortunate enough to barely get a summer in this country often, but talk to me a little bit about that without being too technical, I suppose, but are things kind of looking up a bit in that area, or are we still kind of limited to indoor activations?
Don't worry, I'm not the tech guy. That's John. But I mean, I think what you're touching on is it is a really interesting question, because the form factor of the devices we're using to access those sorts of experiences when we're out and about is this one. And that has some amazing benefits because the companies that make these, both the hardware and the software, have been so successful in getting them into billions and billions of people's hands around the world. So from a democratization, accessibility point of view, these are incredible. The major limitation when it comes to our world is that, anything like arm's length, they're very, very small. And so we're looking through them, these little windows, and we're looking through them into the world. And as much as I think we're all showing, those of us who work in this space, that that's not a deal breaker limitation. You can still do some brilliantly effective things, whether that's entertainment, whether that's interior design and try on and all of these sorts of very, very practical experiences. This works perfectly well. And the way that we're seeing some of the alternative hardware developing, particularly wearable technologies, suggests that we're still going to be using these for a while to come. I think we're still measuring that in multiples of years, rather than sort of ditching them in favour of glasses anytime soon. So as much as there are limitations of it, I think it's about embracing those, accepting those, recognizing again where it's most impactful, using it where it's fit for purpose, and not using it where it's not. Not trying to shoehorn it in an environment where actually it doesn't belong, or because of the form factor, it's not as effective as it ought to be. Is there a day coming where we have moved on, where the technology has allowed us to engage in those spaces in hands-free ways? Almost certainly, but I would very, very reluctantly put any kind of estimation on that, because frankly, as an industry, we've all been wrong for quite a long time. Every year was going to be the year that Apple announced their glasses, and then when it's finally come, the Apple Vision Pro is a fantastic piece of kit, but it's also shown how far away we are, both commercially. I mean, at £3,500, we're not going to be seeing too many of these around at the moment, but also technologically, in terms of the weight, the form factor, we're a long way off that kind of world. So I think outdoors particularly, but sort of anywhere, we are much better served recognizing where we are and working with those constraints and finding the best ways to optimize those experiences, rather than designing for a future which is still a ways off.
Good stuff. Just finally, Alex, I wanted to ask a question that's just personal to you, really. So if you could bring any heritage site on Earth, and you seem a well-travelled fella, any site at all, or any moment from history to life with XR, what would you pick?
Oh, wow. Any moment from history. Well, having just talked about the limitations of these things, one of the things that really excites me, which is almost going back to that, what we were saying earlier about when we first encountered this tech, you start to, your imagination runs wild before you even start to consider the limitations and what it's not capable of. You think, oh, we can do this, we can do that. And I've always felt that sort of mass scale experiences are one of the holy grails that we can work towards and have been working towards, and particularly persistent mass scale experiences. So the reference, which is not a historical one, but a cultural one, I'll draw it back to history in a second, is Westworld. So when I first saw AR and started to imagine the possibilities around it, I think the first series, the most recent, I think it was HBO, Westworld, this idea of a populated space. In their world, their futuristic world, it's robots. In our world, it's unlikely to be robots for a little while yet, but it could be digital avatars. And I want to be able to populate spaces, big spaces, with persistent characters that we can all, as players, visitors, fans, users, audiences, whatever you want to call it, we can all visit these spaces and encounter these characters as part of a one whole experience. What I mean by that is that if there is a character standing here and you and I are standing next to each other, then we, and more importantly our devices, will agree that there is a character standing just here, and we can engage with them in the most authentic way possible, which is bringing them as close to reality as possible. And that's saying that, well, there's only one of those. So unlike a lot of these experiences that are very one-to-one, it becomes one-to-many in terms of that character being on scene. And we've been exploring some ways that we can create that persistent experience. We think we're nearly there, which is massively exciting because it opens the doors, yes, to kind of, mass, wide-scale, sort of Zelda-like role-playing games, which that's really cool. But it also opens the door to sort of restaging or reenactments of historical events. I'm thinking 1066 style battles, for example, that you can see from afar, that you can wander through, that you can, explore in ways that feel so real. Yes, I'm looking through a device, and maybe one day looking through one of these, but they feel real because they behave like they would if they were real. They behave in the way that they only exist on that spot right there, and my device is clever enough to recognize that. And so I can engage with it, frankly, as if it were real. That's really exciting, and I think we're close. Yes, the hardware will change, but that style of experience, that style of persistent engagement, persistent offer, I think has the potential to transform the way that we engage with heritage, historical sites. I want to be able to walk through Windsor Castle and encounter Henry VIII. And I want to be able to do all those things. And I think we nearly can.
That's so exciting and a wonderful place to finish, I think, Alex. That future gaze is something that obviously you're clearly passionate about, as are so many in our industry. And I think you're absolutely right to flag it's it's been a difficult part of the cycle. It's been a difficult period, but ultimately, to use a pun, we're all still in the game, and that vision you've just imparted there is just such an exciting thing for us all to still be around for in the coming decades, let's hope. So it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your time today, Alex. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Owen. Really appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me on.
Good stuff. In terms of people being able to follow you and the work of Arcade XR, where do people find you guys?
Mostly we've got our, God, it feels old fashioned to say a website. You can have a look at our website, arcade-xr.com. We're probably most active on LinkedIn, either me personally or the company. We've moved away from Mr. Musk's platform of late, I think. So those are the two main ones you can find us. We pop up at various events, obviously, and if anybody wants to carry on any of the conversations, the topics that have been raised here, clearly, by all means, drop me a note on LinkedIn, and I think my email's on there as well.
Good stuff. All right, thank you again, Alex. Really appreciate you joining us. Hope you'll consider coming on again in the future.
100%. Thanks, Owen.
Cheers, mate. Thanks a lot. All the best. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Squeezing the Juice. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to give us a thumbs up, a like, or a follow, wherever you get your podcasts, it'll help us grow our tribe as we build the pod. I look forward to welcoming you back soon when we'll be squeezing the juice with another guest from the world of XR. Until then, take care.